Today's News Talk Radio.
Come on, let the man talk.
We never censor our hosts.
Good. Now, talk.
Uncensored news.
On today's News Talk, TNT.
Right, now with 5 days left, there are the guests that have been picked this week have been picked intentionally. They are people that I really wanted to get back, and James Roguski is one of them, because I think without James's work on the WHO, the IHR, and all the other stuff going on with the criminal global cabal, many of us wouldn't know what was going on, because it really is laborious work, as James will testify to, won't you, James?
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on. And as we speak, we're right smack in the middle of a couple of, really important things. The United Nations is in the middle of their General Assembly. This is a mixed bag in the sense that we all should want to celebrate what they have scheduled for Saturday, which is the International Day of Peace. Which obviously, we all want peace in the world, but it's a testament to their utter failure. Obviously, the world is not at peace. That's the core mission of the United Nations. They want to expand, their peacemaking capabilities. But, you have to ask yourself, after almost 80 years, do you keep adding, to the failure? And at the same time, at the WHO, they're undergoing negotiations very quietly still for the pandemic treaty, which some people have claimed was rejected or killed or dead. No, it's just taken them a little bit longer than they had hoped, and they very clearly hope to get it done by early November, because they want to have a special session before the end of the year to push through the pandemic treaty.
Interesting. November. What else is happening in November, James? The timing of that. Let's start with it's on the 21st, International Peace Day. Then, what are the UN? What are they saying? How are they advertising this? What is their message?
Well, it's very quietly going to come and go. I remember it because I have a friend whose birthday is, September 21st, and so I became aware of this, quite some time ago, and it's just really, 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 it's a celebration of what their core purpose is, but they've failed at it miserably between the Ukraine and Gaza and, all throughout the world, in Africa and so forth and so on. We need a better way to, bring peace to the world, because whatever the heck the United Nations has been doing for almost 80 years, it's just not working. And so, I encourage everyone to work and speak out and pray for peace and, bring peace into your own lives. But for the United Nations to be celebrating, their efforts, to bring peace to the world this coming Saturday, the 21st, it's an embarrassment, quite frankly.
Yeah, and of course on the health side as well, the WHO hasn't brought health to the world. It's done exactly the opposite in the last 4 years. James, what would you suggest? Because obviously at the moment we've got a world order with a superpower at the top of the pile. Over the next few years, if we make it that far with all of the conflicts and everything else going on, then it seems that we're moving towards a multipolar world. What needs to change at the United Nations to make it an effective, I guess, almost, I don't want to say government, because we don't want a one world government, but something which sits above governments and is effective? What needs to change, do you think, James?
Well, quite frankly, they need to go away, because they become such a bureaucratic mess. It doesn't seem like they have the structure to be able to handle, a multipolar world. Now, one of the things that people can do is go to stoptheglobalagenda.com. In the United States, we have legislation for the U.S. not only to exit the United Nations, but to get the United Nations out of the United States. And so, unbeknownst to most people and unreported by most people who have been even talking about the pact for the future, for decades now, there has been a quiet, as far as the world is concerned, effort to reform the Security Council of the United Nations. a lot of the smaller nations in the world, not the five who have veto power in the Security Council, the United States, Russia, China, UK, and France, they have veto power in the Security Council. And many of the nations, specifically larger nations, India, Brazil, Japan, so forth and so on, they are quite unhappy mainly with the United States, and especially with the Israel-Gaza issue. The U.S. has used their veto power in the Security Council over and over and over again to essentially try to maintain that unipolar view of the world by stopping resolutions that the rest of the world actually want. And so I hate to say this, I'm not encouraging it. I don't want it to happen. But what I see is the BRICS nations coming together to form alliances around the world that more and more and more are making both the United Nations and the WHO irrelevant. It's really the United Nations and the structure that came out of World War II. Well, 80 years later, the world is a very different place. And it's kind of interesting, their sustainable development goals, probably now with this Pact for the Future, the only thing they're trying to sustain is their own hold on power. The main aspect of the Pact for the Future is, to transform global governance. Well, their ridiculous behaviors and failures are going to transform global governance. All right, it's going to make the United Nations and the WHO irrelevant. I've been saying this for almost a year now, and again, I don't want to promote this, and I'm not trying to manifest it into the world, but I know I'm going to wake up one morning and I'm going to read an article that says that the WHO has been created, and everybody's going to go, the BRICS Health Organization. Well, why not? Okay, could they do any worse than the WHO?
Yeah, exactly, James. And I was looking because the BRICS, they've got their big conference coming up. I think it's in October in Russia, Kazan. It's being held in, and there's a whole series of events leading up to that this year. They kicked off in, I think, January, February. Quite extraordinary. The level now of work that's going on within the BRICS nations. So on finance, on health, on everything to do with governing a country and governing the world. Basically, they've got ministers from all over the BRICS countries coming together at these different conferences leading up to the one in October, where the leaders of the BRICS countries to get together. So yeah, I think, there's lots of people who would say, well, do we really want China, Russia, Iran and other countries leading the world? But like you said, can they really do it any worse than what we've got at the moment? So, but I think it's a good thing moving to a multipolar world, because really the UN that Security Council shouldn't have vetoes from 5 countries, which, like you said, is a legacy of the Second World War. It shouldn't have those holding those vetoes over the rest of the world. It's absolutely ridiculous. James, we're going to take a very short break now. And when we come back, I'd just like you to summarize a little bit more about this Summit of the Future. I think it's being held on the 22nd, 23rd. Well, the main event is in New York at the United Nations there. So we'll talk all about that in a second, right here on TNT.
It sounds pretty good. It sounds real, dude. Not bad, huh?
Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, TNT.
Right, James. So tell us about this summit going on this week. Is there anything that they're going to vote on? What's the actual, obviously it's called the Summit of the Future, but what does that mean?
Well, for the last well over a year, they've been negotiating 3 separate documents. One of them called the Pact for the Future. That's the main document. And linked to that were 2 somewhat smaller, but still important documents, the Global Digital Compact and the Declaration on Future Generations. Now, the way they do this both makes a little bit of sense, but also makes no sense at all. When the negotiators get to a point where they think that they've reached a consensus agreement with the 193 nations negotiations, they compile a consensus document, and then they go through what they call the silence procedure. And what that is an agreement that, okay, the negotiators have reached an agreement, but they need to get final approval from their home governments. Well, it's been interesting because the Pact for the Future went through that silence procedure at the beginning of September, and some nations did object to some of the wording of the document. So they broke the silence, meaning, hey guys, they don't have a consensus. There has been no word yet that it went back again to see if there was a revised version that the nations had time to reject. The same thing happened earlier for the Declaration on Future Generations, and that was only a 5-page document, and they couldn't agree to quite a lot of things in that document. Now, the pact, the Global Digital Compact, is even more interesting. They've had 3 revisions after the 0 draft, and out in the universe, there's a 4th revision that was made available by some non-government organizations, but it never made it to the official United Nations website. So there's no way to know, did they actually put the Global Digital Compact through this silence procedure? Do the negotiators even think that they've reached an agreement? And, there's important issues in here. You're talking about a global digital ID, health data, artificial intelligence, maybe global digital currencies. They love to go into these meetings with everything all agreed upon, so they can just go through the pomp and circumstance and essentially say, well, we don't really want to vote on it. They don't want to know that there's dissension in the ranks. They want to be able to say, oh, everybody here is good. Okay, great. Boom, we adopted it and move on to the party. And it remains to be seen if any of the nations are going to push back, not the least of which might be the 5 big nations in the Security Council, because one of the aspects of the Pact for the Future is talking about a transformation of the Security Council, which none of them really want.
There's lots of jiggery pokery that goes on, isn't there, James? Like the fact that you have these things that go through, and rather than having a vote to say, yes, everybody agrees, it's just like, well, this will be the way things are unless you come back over the next 12 months and say, no, we want to opt out. So they do everything back to front. It's for a reason, obviously, because they are trying to push through stuff rather than come to a true consensus. James, final question. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
Well, I'm an optimist. So, pessimism, I think if you're pessimistic to the point where you want it to be better and you think that it's getting worse, if that triggers you to action, then, take your pessimism and use it to make the world a better place. I'm always optimistic that if you don't do anything, right, well, then you're not, involved in life. And one of the issues with the United Nations and the WHO and, Parliament around the world or Congress or anything, if you're silent, you are by default giving your consent. You're like, they're doing whatever they're going to do. I'm just going to let them do it. So whether you're pessimistic or optimistic, if you take that and you go, I don't like what they're doing. So, in a certain sense, I'm down on, them having more control. And the biggest issue really is, wait a minute, did anybody there ever ask the people of the world for our input into what they plan to do to the world? Our representatives, whether it's the United Nations, the WHO, Parliament, or your city council or your school board, they're supposed to serve our wishes. They only get our consent, to govern us if we give it to them, but they operate on the policy of, well, if you don't say anything, then we're just going to keep doing what we want to do. And so, I'm optimistic that people can come together and, bring peace to the world. It starts within, but also make the world a better place, whether you're talking about health or, the digital world or whatever it may be, the last thing in the world anybody should do is be so pessimistic that they remain silent. That would be the worst thing.
Excellent, as always, James. James Roguski, ladies and gentlemen. And James, thank you again. James is, I think it's about 5:41 in the morning where you are. So thank you so much for getting out of bed. And James, finally, where do people go to read your content?
You just go to jamesroguski.substack.com. It's Roguski. And James, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working with you. And I look forward to working with you in the future.
Oh, James, we will talk again, whether it's on TNT or somewhere else. Don't you worry. Thank you very much, James Roguski. Right, we're going to take a short break now. And when we come back, I'm going to be speaking with Mads Polsvik. He's the chairman of Prosperity Party in Denmark, and he's a former Morgan Stanley executive turned whistleblower. What I want to talk about with Mads is he's got the 5 steps. It's called the Mosvig plan, and it's how to undo the capture that these criminal cabal have done on all of our institutions like the UN. He's got a 5-step plan on how to undo that. So we'll be talking all about that after this short break on TNT.
You are about to hear
Today's News Talk and the voice of freedom. We're Today's News Talk, TNT.